The chamber was built to make visitors feel small. Ambassador Elena Voss knew this as she walked across the polished obsidian floor, her footsteps echoing in the vast space above. The ceiling stretched so high that clouds actually formed near the top, and the 12 thrones of the Galactic Council members rose like mountains on every side. Each throne held a representative of the elder species, the civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years before humanity ever looked up at the stars. Elena's hands were steady, but her heart pounded. She had practiced her speech 100 times. She had refined every word, every argument. Behind her, the holographic display showed Earth blue, beautiful, and so very far away. Around Earth, hundreds of human colonies glowed like tiny sparks across dozens of star systems. Everything humanity had built in 200 years of space exploration hung in the balance today. The Archon of the Council, a being called Galactic, whose species name humans could barely pronounce, rose from the central throne. Its body was translucent, filled with swirling lights that represented thoughts in ways humans could not fully understand. When it spoke, the words came through translation devices embedded in the chamber walls. Ambassador Voss of humanity, you stand before this council to answer for your species' crimes against the established order. The charges are grave. How do you answer? Elena lifted her chin. She had been chosen for this role because she never backed down. Not even when facing beings that saw humanity as children playing with dangerous toys. Honorable Archon, members of the council, I answer that humanity has committed no crimes. We have only exercised our right to exist, to grow, and to determine our own future. A sound like grinding stones came from the throne to her left. It was the representative of the Valos hegemony, a species that looked like living rock formations. Your right? It rumbled. You were given the gift of faster-than-light travel. You were welcomed into galactic society. And how did you repay this generosity? With aggressive expansion. With refusal to accept your proper place. Elena turned to face the Valos representative. Our proper place? You mean as a client species? Subservient. Forever children in your eyes. Never allowed to grow up. That is the way of order, said another council member, this one from the Yulari communion. The Yulari looked almost human, except for their silver skin and the third eye in their foreheads. Every species must accept guidance from their elders. Every species must contribute to the greater harmony. You humans insist on doing things your own way. You terraform worlds without permission. You establish colonies in regions not designated for your settlement. You refuse to share your technological advances with the common database. You even... The Yulari's voice took on a tone of disbelief. You even allow your colony worlds to govern themselves differently. There is no unity, no harmony, only chaos. We call it freedom, Elena said quietly. We call it the right of people to choose their own governments, their own destinies. Yes, our colony worlds have different systems. Some are democracies. Some are corporate ventures. Some are religious communities. But they are all human. And they are all free. Is that really such a terrible crime? Galactic's lights swirled faster, colors shifting through the spectrum. You do not understand, young species. For 3 million of your years, the Council has maintained peace across this galaxy. We have prevented wars. We have guided younger species. We have created an order that allows billions of trillions of beings to coexist. Your individualism threatens that order. Your aggressive nature threatens that peace. We have threatened no one. Elena protested. We have fought no wars with Council species. We have engaged in trade, in cultural exchange. Our colonies border empty space. Space we chose to leave empty, interrupted the representative from the Korath Dominion. The Korath resembled enormous insects, with clicking mandibles and multiple eyes, space that serves as a buffer between the civilized regions and the outer darkness. You treat these buffer zones as if they were unclaimed territory. You expand without limit, without control. Where will it end? When will your hunger for new worlds be satisfied? Elena took a breath. She had known this would be difficult, but the hostility in the chamber was worse than she had expected. Humanity has settled 47 worlds beyond our home system. 47. Council member species control thousands of worlds each. The Valos hegemony alone administers over 2,000 settled planets. We are not threatening anyone's territory. We are simply growing, as all species must. At an unprecedented rate, said Jothic. In 200 years, you have spread farther than most species do in 2,000. Your population growth is explosive. Your resource consumption is staggering. Your culture celebrates competition, conflict, and individual achievement over collective good. These are the traits of a dangerous species. These are the traits that have destroyed countless civilizations before they could reach maturity. Or, Elena said, letting some of her frustration show, these are the traits that have allowed us to survive and thrive in an often hostile universe. My people have faced extinction multiple times in our history. We learn to adapt. We learn to innovate. We learn to never give up. Yes, we are competitive. Yes, we value individual freedom, but we also value cooperation when it matters. We have united our entire species under one federation. We have eliminated poverty, war, and hunger on our home world. We have achieved things you told us were impossible. And now you want to punish us for succeeding too well? The chamber fell silent for a moment. Then the Yulari spoke again, and there was something like sadness in its voice. You still do not understand. This is not about punishment. This is about prevention. We have seen species like yours before, Ambassador. Species that burn too bright, too fast. Species that cannot be controlled, cannot be guided. They always end the same way in fire and darkness, taking innocent civilizations down with them. We cannot allow that to happen again. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. What are you saying? Jothic's lights pulsed once, a deep crimson that filled the chamber with blood-colored illumination. The Council has made its decision. Humanity is hereby exiled from Galactic society. You have 50 standard years to withdraw from all territories outside your home star system. All trade agreements are terminated immediately. All diplomatic channels are closed. All technology sharing is revoked. The stargates in human space will be confiscated and dismantled. Navigation beacons will be removed. You will be returned to your sol system, and there you will remain. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. You can't do this. You're sentencing us to isolation. To slow death. We are ensuring the safety of galactic civilization, said the Korath representative. Your expansion ends now. Your colonies will be reclaimed and reassigned to species that can govern them responsibly. Your people will have 50 years to evacuate. That is generous, considering the threat you represent. Elena's mind raced. 50 years. Billions of humans living on colony worlds, told to abandon their homes. The stargates that allowed travel between stars in days, instead of decades, taken away. Humanity would be trapped in one system, cut off from the rest of the galaxy, while every other species continued to grow and prosper. It was exile. It was imprisonment. It was a death sentence delivered slowly. This is not justice, she said, and her voice carried across the vast chamber. This is fear. You fear us because we will not bow. You fear us because we dare to be different. You fear us because deep down, you know that your precious order is stagnant. It is a cage, and we refuse to enter it. So you will build a bigger cage around our entire species and call it wisdom. Watch your tongue, human, growled the Valos representative. You stand before the highest authority in the galaxy, an authority that has just proven itself tyrannical. Elena shot back. You speak of peace and harmony, but what you really want is control. Absolute, unchanging control. Well, you cannot control us. You could have tried to work with us. You could have tried to find a middle ground. Instead, you choose exile. You choose to make an enemy where you could have had an ally. Jothic's lights flickered through a sequence of colors Elena had never seen before. When it spoke, there was something almost like regret in the translated words. We do not seek enemies, Ambassador Voss. But neither can we allow the cancer of uncontrolled ambition to spread through the galaxy we have protected for so long. Your species will have time to reflect in isolation. Perhaps, in a few thousand years, you will mature. Perhaps you will learn to value harmony over chaos. Until then, this is goodbye. The vote has been taken, announced the Yulari. All 12 council members vote in favor of exile. The decree is unanimous and final. Ambassador Voss, you have 30 days to leave council space. Your ship will be escorted to the border. All other human vessels will be similarly escorted. The clock begins now. Elena stood alone on the obsidian floor, surrounded by beings who had just condemned her entire species to exile. She thought about her children back on Earth, about the colonists who had spent their whole lives building new worlds, about the scientists and explorers and dreamers who had pushed humanity to the stars. What would she tell them? How could she explain that the galaxy had no room for them? But even as despair threatened to overwhelm her, something else stirred in Elena's chest. It was the same thing that had driven her ancestors to cross oceans on wooden ships, to climb mountains no one had climbed before, to venture into space when it seemed impossible. It was defiance. It was the absolute refusal to accept defeat. She looked up at Jothic, at the swirling lights that represented a mind millions of years old. When she spoke, her voice was steady and clear. You have made your judgment. We will make our future. You believe you are protecting the galaxy from humanity. I think, Archon, that you have just protected humanity from the galaxy, from your stagnation, from your fear, from your need to control everything and everyone. Elena turned and began walking toward the chamber exit. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. At the doorway, she paused and looked back one last time. 50 years, you said. 50 years to evacuate our colonies. I wonder, in 50 years, will you remember this moment? Will you remember the day you could have gained humanity as a partner, but chose to make us find our own path instead? I suspect you will. I very much suspect you will. She walked through the doorway and did not look back again. Behind her, the 12 members of the Galactic Council sat in silence on their thrones. None of them spoke. None of them moved. They had made their decision, following protocols established over millions of years. They had protected galactic civilization from a dangerous, unpredictable species, but Jothic's lights had gone a deep, troubled blue. The Archon had seen many species rise and fall over its long lifetime. It had witnessed the exile of 3 other civilizations, each one deemed too dangerous to integrate into the galactic order. 2 of those species had died out within centuries, unable to survive isolation. The 3rd had simply vanished. Their worlds found empty and silent when scouts finally returned after 10,000 years. What would become of humanity? The Archon did not know. But something about Ambassador Voss's final words troubled it. There had been no defeat in her voice, no despair, only determination, only defiance, only the absolute certainty that humanity would survive this, would thrive despite it, would find a way forward that the Council could not predict or control. For the first time in a very long time, Jothic felt something it had not experienced in millions of years. It felt doubt, and beneath that doubt, buried deep but undeniably present, it felt the first stirrings of fear. The session was over. The judgment had been delivered. Humanity had been exiled. But as Elena Voss boarded her ship and began the journey back to Earth, she was already thinking about the future. The Council had taken away the stargates. They had taken away the navigation beacons. They had taken away the easy path to the stars. But they had not taken away humanity's will. They had not taken away human ingenuity. They had not taken away the fundamental drive that had pushed her species from caves to cities, from cities to space, from one planet to dozens. The Council had meant to cage humanity, to limit them, to teach them their place in the galactic order. Instead, they had done something far more dangerous. They had given humanity a reason to surpass them. They had given humanity a challenge that would define the next chapter of human history. They had given humanity an enemy and a goal. They had, Elena realized with a grim smile, made a terrible mistake. But that mistake would take time to unfold. 50 years. Perhaps less. Perhaps more. But it would unfold. And when it did, the galaxy would learn what humanity could do when backed into a corner, when freed from the chains of someone else's order, when given no choice but to forge their own path among the stars. The Council thought they had ended the human story. Elena knew they had only just begun it. The news hit Earth like a nuclear blast. Within hours of Elena Voss's transmission from the Council chambers, every screen on every human world showed the same message: Exiled. 47 colony worlds. 6 billion humans living beyond Sol system. 50 years to evacuate or be forcibly removed. The stargates already being dismantled by Council enforcement vessels. Humanity was being sent home, and home was suddenly feeling very small. On New Vancouver, colonists who had spent 20 years turning a frozen world into farmland watched the Council ships arrive in orbit. The ships did not fire weapons. They did not need to. They simply broadcast a message. You have 18 months to evacuate this world. Then they waited, patient and implacable, like bailiffs at a foreclosed property. Some colonists wept. Some raged. Some simply stared at the sky and wondered where they would go, what they would do, how they would tell their children that the home they had built was being taken away. On Mars, in the great dome cities that housed 1 billion people, riots broke out. The Martian Colonial Authority had to deploy peacekeepers to prevent the destruction of infrastructure. People were angry, confused, and terrified. Mars had been humanity's first major off-Earth colony, settled before the Council ever gave humanity FTL technology. Did the exile apply to Mars? To the moon bases? To the asteroid mining stations? The Council's decree was clear. All human presence outside the Sol system must withdraw. Mars was safe. Everything else was not. Dr. James Chen watched the chaos unfold from his laboratory on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. He was a physicist, one of thousands who had dedicated their lives to understanding the principles behind faster-than-light travel. The Council had given humanity FTL technology as a gift, but they had never explained how it worked. The stargates were black boxes. You entered one end, emerged light years away at the other. The math was beyond human understanding, or so the Council had always claimed. James did not believe that anymore. He had spent 15 years studying the energy signatures of stargate transitions. He had built models, run simulations, and collaborated with the brightest minds in human space. And he had begun to see patterns. Structures, principles that could be understood, replicated, and perhaps even improved upon. But his research had always been theoretical. A curiosity pursued in spare time between official projects. Now, as he watched Council ships dismantling the Stargate in orbit above Saturn, theory became urgent necessity. He sent a message to Elena Voss, now appointed as the new Secretary General of the United Earth Federation. The message was simple. Give me 20 years and unlimited resources. I can get us back to the stars. Our own way. Our own technology. No more dependence on the Council. Elena's response came back within an hour. You have 10 years, and every resource humanity can spare. Make it work. The Exodus Protocol began 3 months after the Council's decree. Every human government, every corporation, every research institution, on every human world, received the same directive. Develop independent FTL technology. Everything else was secondary. The economy could wait. Social programs could wait. Art, culture, entertainment, all of it could wait. Humanity had one goal now. Break the cage the Council had built around them. The first challenge was obvious. The Council had removed not just the stargates, but also the navigation beacons that made interstellar travel possible. Without those beacons, even if humans developed their own FTL drive, they would be flying blind through space-time, unable to find their destinations, unable to navigate the currents and eddies of faster-than-light space. It was like having a ship but no compass, no maps, No way to know where you were going until you arrived somewhere, probably the wrong somewhere. But humanity had something the Council never expected. They had desperation. And desperation made people creative in ways comfort never could. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, an astrophysicist from the Lagos Space Center, proposed a radical solution. Instead of relying on artificial beacons, why not use natural ones? Every star emitted a unique signature of radiation, gravitational waves, and quantum fluctuations. If you could build a database of these signatures, create a detailed map of space based on natural stellar phenomena, you could navigate without any artificial aids. It would require measuring thousands of stars, building computational models of staggering complexity, and developing sensors that could detect quantum variations across light years. It would take years. It would require the combined efforts of every observatory, every space telescope, every sensor array humanity possessed. But it was possible. Elena gave the order. Begin mapping immediately. The Great Survey began, and humanity turned its eyes to the stars with an intensity that bordered on obsession. James Chen and his team attacked the FTL problem from another angle. The Council's stargates worked by creating stable wormholes through higher dimensions. That much was clear from observation. But creating stable wormholes required exotic matter with negative energy density, something that existed only theoretically in human physics. The Council obviously knew how to generate or find this exotic matter. Humans did not, unless they looked at the problem differently. James remembered something from old Earth history, a theory proposed by a physicist named Miguel Alcubierre. In the late 20th century, the Alcubierre drive concept suggested compressing space-time in front of a ship while expanding it behind, creating a warp bubble that could move faster than light without actually accelerating the ship. It had always been dismissed as impossible because it too required exotic matter. But what if you did not need to maintain the warp bubble constantly? What if you could pulse it, creating brief moments of faster-than-light travel, interspersed with normal space? It would be slower than the Council's continuous FTL. Much slower. But it would be independent. It would be human technology, built with human understanding, controlled by human operators. James pitched the idea to a joint conference of physicists, engineers, and military strategists. He expected skepticism. Instead, he got funding, personnel, and a mandate. Make it work. Within 6 months, construction began on the first prototype drive at a facility in the asteroid belt. They called it the Alcubierre Chen Drive, and they called the prototype ship Defiance. The years that followed were hard. Humanity's economy was transformed into a war economy. Though there was no war, only a race against time and physics. The asteroid belt became the center of a massive industrial complex. Thousands of mining ships stripped resources from asteroids. Hundreds of orbital factories processed those resources into ship components, drive systems, sensors, weapons, because everyone knew, though no one said it openly at first, that when humanity returned to the stars, the Council might not welcome them back. The United Earth Forces, humanity's combined military, underwent the most dramatic transformation. It had been a defensive force, designed to protect shipping lanes and deter pirates. Now it became the Terran Expeditionary Navy, a fleet built for deep space operations, for survival far from any support, for scenarios that ranged from exploration to combat. Admiral Marcus Stone, a career officer who had spent 30 years in space, took command. His first order was simple: train for the worst and hope for the best. On Earth, the cultural shift was profound. The generation that came of age during the exile developed a worldview shaped entirely by the Council's rejection. They called themselves the Exodus generation. And they were harder than their parents. More focused, more willing to sacrifice comfort for goals that might take decades to achieve. They studied engineering, physics, medicine, military science. They trained for lives in space, on hostile worlds, in situations where help would be months or years away. They prepared for a future that no one could predict, but everyone knew would be difficult. Not everyone supported the Exodus protocol. There were voices, particularly on Earth, that argued for acceptance. The Council had exiled humanity. Yes, but Sol System was vast. Billions could live comfortably on Mars, the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, the asteroid stations. Why pour resources into developing risky technology to challenge beings millions of years more advanced? Why not accept the exile and build a good life within the bounds the Council had set? These voices were shouted down, not by government decree, but by popular will. Humanity had been told they were not good enough, not mature enough, not worthy of a place among the stars. That insult burned in ways the practical arguments never could. It was not about resources or living space. It was about dignity, about refusing to accept someone else's judgment of human worth, about proving that humanity would not be caged, would not be controlled, would not accept limits imposed by others. Elena Voss captured this sentiment in a speech that became famous across all human worlds. Standing before the United Earth Assembly, she said, "They think we are children. They think we need their guidance, their rules, their permission to exist as we choose. But children grow up. And when they do, they leave home, not because they hate their parents, but because they must find their own way. The Council is not our parent. They never were. They were only the neighbors we met when we first left our house. And now, those neighbors have told us to go home and stay there. Well, I say this. We will go home. We will gather our strength. We will learn. We will grow. And then we will leave home again, on our own terms, with our own technology, answerable to no one but ourselves." Year 8 of the Exodus Protocol brought the first major success. The Defiance completed its initial FTL test. James Chen and a volunteer crew of 12 engaged the Alcubierre Chen drive and vanished from normal space. For 10 seconds, every monitoring station in the solar system held its breath. Then Defiance reappeared, 40 million kilometers from where it had started. The distance was trivial by interstellar standards, but it was movement. It was proof of concept. It was hope made real. The celebration lasted one day. Then James and his team went back to work. 40 million kilometers in 10 seconds was not enough. They needed to reach Proxima Centauri, over 4 light-years away. They needed to sustain the warp bubble for minutes, not seconds. They needed to solve the navigation problem, the power problem, the structural integrity problem. They needed to turn a laboratory curiosity into a practical Starship drive. It took another 18 months. The second test run of Defiance reached Proxima Centauri and returned. The trip took 6 weeks each way, far slower than the Council's instantaneous Stargate travel. But it worked. It worked with human technology, human physics, human engineering. And once they knew it worked, they could improve it. By year 10 of the Exodus Protocol, the first production model FTL drives rolled off the assembly lines in the asteroid belt. The Terran Expeditionary Navy took delivery of 30 Explorer-class vessels, each equipped with the new drives. The new navigation systems based on Sarah Okonkwo's stellar survey, and enough supplies to operate independently for 5 years. These were not the sleek, comfortable vessels that had traveled through Council stargates. These were rugged, overbuilt ships designed to survive anything space could throw at them. By year 15, the evacuation of human colonies outside Sol System was complete. It had been brutal. Some colonists refused to leave until Council enforcement vessels literally seized them. 3 worlds saw small-scale violence before people finally accepted they had no choice. But in the end, 6 billion humans returned to Sol System, cramming into habitats and settlements that strained to accommodate them. It was crowded. It was uncomfortable. And it made humanity even more determined to find new worlds of their own. By year 20, everything was ready. 300 colony ships, each capable of carrying 20,000 people, sat in orbit around Mars. Escort vessels, armed with the latest weapons, surrounded them. The Terran Expeditionary Navy had grown to over 500 ships, ranging from small scouts to massive dreadnoughts that carried enough firepower to sterilize a planet. And every ship had the Alcubierre Chen drive. Every ship could navigate using the stellar survey data. Every ship was independent of Council technology. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of his flagship, the TEN Indomitable, and looked at the fleet gathered around him. He thought about the last 20 years. The sacrifice, the work, the single-minded determination that had transformed humanity from a species dependent on Council gifts to a species that had clawed its way back to the stars through sheer will and ingenuity. They were slower than the Council. Their technology was cruder, but it was theirs. Elena Voss broadcast from Earth, her image appearing on every screen throughout the fleet. She was older now, gray-haired, and lined with the stress of 2 decades leading humanity through its darkest period. But her eyes were as fierce as ever. To the crews and colonists of the Exodus fleet. 20 years ago, the Galactic Council exiled us. They took our colonies. They took our place among the stars. They thought they could contain us, limit us, teach us our place. They were wrong. She paused, and her voice hardened. Today, we return to space. Not to the worlds the Council took from us. Those are lost, and we will not waste lives trying to reclaim them. Instead, we go beyond. We go to places the Council has never been. We go to the regions they call too dangerous, too difficult, too far from their precious civilization. We will build new worlds there. We will forge a new future there. And we will do it without asking anyone's permission. The transmission showed the fleet beginning to move, thousands of ships accelerating away from Sol system. The Council thought exile was a punishment. But they forgot something about humanity. We are not a species that accepts limits. We are not a species that gives up. We are not a species that obeys when we believe the rules are wrong. They wanted us gone. They should have been more careful about where they sent us. Because we are going into the dark, and we are going to light it up with human stars. And when we do, the galaxy will never be the same. The Exodus fleet engaged their FTL drives and vanished from Sol system. Admiral Stone watched the stars shift and blur on the view screen. He thought about the unknown territories ahead, the worlds waiting to be discovered, the challenges that would test everything humanity had learned. He thought about the Council, sitting in their comfortable chambers, believing they had solved the human problem 20 years ago. He smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret the Council did not. Exile had not weakened humanity. It had forged them into something harder, something more dangerous, something that would not stop until they had proven the Council's judgment wrong. The long dark was over. The claiming was about to begin. The Exodus fleet emerged from FTL space at the coordinates marked as Sector 447 on human star charts. On Council maps, this region was labeled with a simple notation: unsuitable for settlement. Admiral Stone looked at the sensor readings and understood why. The star system they had entered contained 7 planets, 4 of them rocky worlds in the habitable zone. But these were not gentle, Earth-like places. One had gravity twice Earth's standard. Another had an atmosphere so thick with volcanic gases that the sky glowed orange even at midday. The third was tidally locked, one side always facing the sun, the other locked in eternal night. The fourth was smaller than Mars, with barely enough gravity to hold an atmosphere. The Council would have moved on. In their millions of years of expansion, they had learned to be selective. Why struggle with difficult worlds when easy ones existed? Why adapt to harsh conditions when comfortable ones were available? It was logical. It was efficient. It was the choice of a civilization that had forgotten how to struggle. Humanity chose differently. Captain Sarah Chen, no relation to Dr. James Chen, though she got asked about it constantly, commanded the colony ship New Beijing. She looked at the tidally locked planet, the one the Council had dismissed, and saw potential. The Terminator Zone, the boundary between eternal day and eternal night, would have a band of perpetual twilight. Temperatures there might be survivable. And the planet had water, vast oceans, locked in ice on the dark side, boiling seas on the light side, but liquid water in the twilight band. We can work with this, she told her crew. "We've lived in worse. Mars was considered uninhabitable once. So was Titan. So was Europa. We made them work. We'll make this work too." New Beijing entered orbit, and the settlement began. It was brutal work. The colonists had to build everything from scratch habitats that could withstand the temperature extremes, power systems that could tap the planet's geothermal activity, farms that could grow food in artificial light. But they had trained for this. More importantly, they wanted this. They wanted to prove that humanity could thrive anywhere, could build homes on worlds the Council had deemed worthless. They named the planet Twilight. Within a year, 50,000 people lived there. Within 5 years, 500,000. The settlement sprawled along the Terminator Zone, a ribbon of lights and life on a world the Council had written off. And the colonists were proud of it. Proud in a way they had never been when living on the comfortable worlds the Council had approved for human settlement. This was theirs, built with human sweat and human ingenuity and human refusal to accept that something was impossible. The same story repeated across dozens of systems. The Exodus fleet split up, each colony ship heading to different sectors of uncharted space. They found worlds with crushing gravity, and humans genetically modified themselves to be shorter and denser, able to survive where the Council's species could not. They found worlds with thin atmospheres, and built massive biodomes that transformed barren rock into gardens. They found worlds rich in heavy metals that made the Council's species sick, and humans shrugged and built radiation-resistant habitats. Admiral Stone oversaw the expansion from his flagship, jumping between systems, ensuring the colonies had what they needed to survive and grow. He began to see a pattern. The buffer zones the Council had maintained between their civilized space and the outer darkness were full of planets the Council considered too difficult to bother with. But humanity had always been the species that chose difficult over impossible. They had climbed mountains because they were there. They had crossed oceans because they wanted to know what was on the other side. They had gone to space because the alternative was staying in one place forever, and that was unacceptable to the human spirit. In year 3 of the new expansion, the Exodus fleet had established 89 settled worlds. None of them were easy. All of them were growing. The Terran Federation, as the government was now officially called, established the Frontier Compact, a charter that gave each colony world radical autonomy. Earth would provide support, defense, and coordination. But each world would govern itself as it saw fit. Some became democracies. Some became corporate ventures. Some became religious communities. Some invented entirely new forms of government that had never been tried before. The Council would have seen this as chaos. The Terran Federation called it freedom. And it worked, because every colony world was bound by a single common purpose: survive and prove that humanity belonged among the stars, regardless of what the Council believed. Year 5 brought the first contact with another species since the exile. The 10 Pathfinder, a scout ship under the command of Captain Li Wei, detected artificial structures on a moon orbiting a gas giant in what humans had designated Sector 491. The structures were clearly technological, but in bad repair. Power sources were failing. Life support was minimal. Something was wrong. Li Wei took a team down in a shuttle. They found the structures inhabited by a reptilian species that called themselves the Kryn. There were only about 10,000 of them left on the moon, living in conditions that barely qualified as survival. They had running water but little food, heat but barely enough. They were slowly dying. And they knew it. Through translation devices cobbled together from old Council technology, Li Wei learned their story. The Kryn had once been a thriving civilization, with dozens of colony worlds, but they had been conquered by the Zentari, one of the Council member species. The Zentari had not exterminated the Kryn. That would have been too inefficient. Instead, they had reduced them to client species status. The Kryn provided labor for Gentari mining operations, extraction facilities, and industrial projects that the Gentari considered too dangerous or too unpleasant for their own people. The moonbase was one such facility. It had extracted rare elements from the gas giant's upper atmosphere for 50 years. Then the deposits ran out, and the Gentari simply abandoned the facility. They took their own people and left the Kryn workers behind with minimal supplies. That had been 8 years ago. The Kryn had been slowly dying ever since. Too far from any trade routes to be rescued. Too few in number to matter to anyone. Li Wei sent the report back to Admiral Stone. The Admiral reviewed it, then sent it to Elena Voss on Earth. Elena read it 3 times. Then, she made a decision that would change the course of human expansion in ways she could not predict. She sent a message to Li Wei. Offer them freedom. Offer them a place in the Terran Federation. Tell them we have no use for slaves, but we have plenty of room for allies. The Kryn's response was immediate and overwhelming. They wept. They celebrated. They swore oaths of loyalty to humanity that made the human diplomats uncomfortable. Li Wei tried to explain that the Terran Federation did not want loyalty oaths or servitude. They wanted allies, partners, fellow travelers in the darkness beyond Council space. It took months for the Kryn to truly understand this. They had lived under Zentari rule for 3 generations. The concept of freedom was almost foreign to them. But slowly, they adapted. The 10,000 survivors were relocated to Twilight, where the human colonists welcomed them. The Kryn's natural resistance to radiation made them valuable workers in some of the more dangerous industrial operations. In return, humanity provided them with food, shelter, education, and a chance to rebuild their civilization. And the Kryn provided something humanity desperately needed: information. They knew the Council's military capabilities. They knew the weaknesses in Council defenses. They knew which species were chafing under Council rule and which were loyal. They knew the locations of resources, trade routes, and strategic systems. 3 generations of servitude had taught the Kryn to be observant, to notice details, to gather information as a survival skill. Admiral Stone studied the intelligence reports from Kryn sources and began to see the galaxy differently. The Council was not the unified, all-powerful entity they pretended to be. They were a collection of old powers holding on to control through tradition and military strength. But traditions could be challenged. Military strength could be matched. And the buffer zones the Council maintained were not just empty space, they were potential territory for any species willing to brave the difficulties. In Year 7, 3 more species requested alliance with humanity. 2 were former Council client species, freed when the Terran Expeditionary Navy stumbled upon their worlds and offered them the same deal given to the Kryn: freedom in exchange for alliance. The 3rd was an independent species called the Vex, insectoid beings who had avoided contact with the Council by hiding in a region of space plagued by gravitational anomalies. The Vex were natural mathematicians and navigators. They saw the Council as a threat to their independence, and humanity as a potential buffer against Council expansion. Elena Voss convened a conference on New Terra, the capital world of the Outer Colonies. Representatives from humanity, the Kryn, the Vex, and the 2 liberated species, the Talasi and the Her, gathered to discuss formal alliance. They called it the Free Stars Coalition. The charter was simple: mutual defense, free trade, and absolute sovereignty for each member species. No species would rule over another. No species would enforce their culture or government on others. They would stand together against threats, but each would govern themselves as they saw fit. The Council heard about the Free Stars Coalition in Year 8. Their response was swift and dismissive. The Galactic Council sent a formal communication to Elena Voss, now holding the title of First President of the Free Stars Coalition, in addition to her role as Secretary General of the Terran Federation. The message was clear. The Council did not recognize the legitimacy of the Free Stars Coalition. The species that had joined humanity were former clients of Council members and were considered to be in violation of their service agreements. Humanity was harboring fugitives and would face consequences if this continued. Elena read the message and laughed. It was not a joyful laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had been pushed too far and had stopped caring about consequences. She composed a response and sent it through the old communication channels that still connected the outer regions to Council space. To the Galactic Council, we acknowledge your message. We reject your authority. The species of the Free Stars Coalition are free beings who have chosen their own paths. We did not steal them. We did not conquer them. We offered them a choice. and they chose freedom. If you consider that a crime, then we gladly plead guilty. We will not return the Kryn to Gentari slavery. We will not return the Talasi and the Hur to client status. We will not bow to threats or demands from a council that has no legitimate authority over us. She paused in her dictation, then continued with words that would be quoted for generations. You exiled us. You sent us into the darkness beyond your borders. You thought you were punishing us. You thought you were protecting yourselves from our dangerous individualism and aggressive nature. But you made a mistake. You assumed we would fade away in isolation, that we would learn our lesson and beg to be readmitted to your civilized space on your terms. Instead, we learned different lessons. We learned that we do not need you. We learned that there are entire regions of space you consider worthless that we can turn into thriving worlds. We learned that there are species suffering under your rule who would rather take their chances with us than continue living as your clients. And most importantly, we learned that we are stronger when we stand together with other free peoples than we ever would be kneeling before your council. This is your doing. You made us into this. And now you will have to live with the consequences. The message was sent. There was no reply from the council for months. Then, in year 9, a single council vessel entered Freestar's space. It did not carry weapons. It carried diplomats. They wanted to negotiate. Admiral Stone met the council delegation on neutral ground, a small station humanity had built at the edge of their territory. The lead diplomat was Yulari, the same species that had argued for humanity's exile at the original trial. The diplomat's name was Sethis, and its silver skin seemed dimmer than Yulari usually appeared. Its third eye clouded with what might have been concern or sadness. Admiral Stone, Sethis said through the translation device. The council wishes to discuss the situation regarding the species you have gathered. We are prepared to negotiate the terms of their return, Stone interrupted. They are not returning. There will be no negotiation on that point. If that is your only purpose here, this meeting is over. Sethis was silent for a moment. Admiral, you must understand. These species are bound by agreements that go back centuries. The Kryn, for instance, entered into a service compact with the Gentari over 200 years ago. You cannot simply declare these agreements void. Watch me, Stone said flatly. Those agreements were signed under duress by conquered peoples who had no other choice. They are not legitimate contracts. They are slavery dressed up in legal language. The Freestar's coalition does not recognize them. And before you threaten military action, let me be clear. We are prepared to defend our allies. Every settlement in Freestar's space is fortified. Every colony has defensive systems. Every civilian ship has military escort. You want to take the Kryn back? You will have to fight us for them. The same applies to every other species we have offered freedom. Sethis's third eye focused intently on Stone. You would go to war with the Galactic Council? You, a species barely 300 years old, would challenge civilizations that have existed for millions of years. That is not bravery, Admiral. That is suicide. Stone leaned forward. Maybe. Or maybe it is long overdue. Your council has grown comfortable. You have not fought a real war in how long? 10,000 years? 100,000? You maintain order through tradition and the threat of overwhelming force. But when was the last time you actually had to use that force? When was the last time you faced an enemy that was not impressed by your age or your technology? We are not the cowering species you exiled 22 years ago. We have built a fleet. We have fortified worlds. We have allies who would rather die free than live as your clients. So yes, we would go to war if you forced us to. And maybe we would lose. But it would not be the easy victory you are expecting. It would cost you. And I think, deep down, you know that. The meeting ended without agreement. Sethis and the council delegation departed, and Stone sent a report to Elena Voss. They are afraid. Not terrified, but worried. They did not expect us to be this strong, this fast. They did not expect us to have allies. They expected to find a handful of desperate human settlements barely surviving in the outer darkness. Instead, they found the Free Stars Coalition. They will try something. I do not know what or when, but they will try to put us back in our place. We need to be ready. Elena received the report and immediately authorized the construction of 20 new shipyards in the outer colonies. The Terran Expeditionary Navy would double in size within 3 years. The Free Stars Coalition would become a military power that could not be ignored or dismissed. And every human world, every allied world, would prepare for the possibility that the Council would not accept their existence peacefully. But even as humanity prepared for confrontation, the expansion continued. By year 10, the Free Stars Coalition encompassed 89 human worlds and 23 worlds belonging to allied species. They controlled a volume of space roughly equal to that held by a mid-level Council member species. And they were still growing. Still pushing further into the regions the Council had abandoned. Still turning worthless rocks into thriving colonies. Admiral Stone stood on the bridge of the Indomitable and looked at a holographic map of Free Stars territory. It glowed with hundreds of points of light settlements, stations, shipyards, mining operations. 2 decades ago, humanity had been exiled with nothing but their home system. Now, they controlled more territory than they had ever held under Council authority. And they had done it without anyone's permission. He thought about Elena Voss's words at the beginning of the Exodus. The Council had thought exile was punishment. But they had given humanity something far more valuable. Motivation. The drive to prove them wrong. The determination to build something that did not depend on Council approval or Council technology. The absolute refusal to accept limits imposed by others. Stone smiled. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how dangerous they had become. The Council had made humanity find their own way. Now, humanity was going to show the galaxy what that way looked like. And the Council, sitting in their ancient chambers, secure in their millions of years of tradition, had no idea what was coming. The crisis came from an unexpected direction. The Valos hegemony, one of the Galactic Council's founding members, announced that they were reclaiming a world called New Gdansk, in what they termed illegally occupied buffer territory. The world had been settled by humans 7 years earlier, and now housed 200,000 colonists. The Valos claimed ancient territorial rights, dating back 50,000 years. Rights that had never been formally ceded, despite the region being abandoned for millennia. Governor Katya Volkov received the Valos ultimatum on a Tuesday morning. The message was formal, cold, and absolute. New Gdansk's human population had 30 days to evacuate. After that deadline, the Valos would deploy military forces to secure the planet for proper resettlement by their own people. Any humans remaining would be removed by force. The message did not threaten violence explicitly, but the implication was clear. Leave peacefully, or be made to leave. Katya was a third-generation colonist, born on Mars during the early days of human expansion. She had been 12 when the Council exiled humanity. And she remembered watching her parents weep as they realized their dreams of a life among the stars were being torn away. She had sworn then that she would never let anyone take her home again. Now she was 42, governor of a thriving colony world, responsible for 200,000 people who had spent 7 years building farms, cities, and lives on New Gdansk. And someone was trying to take it all away. She sent an urgent message to Elena Voss on New Terra. Elena's response came within hours. Do not evacuate. We will not abandon New Gdansk. Hold your position. Help is coming. The Valos fleet arrived at New Gdansk 28 days after the ultimatum, 2 days early. They were making a point about punctuality and overwhelming force. 53 warships, each one larger than anything in the Terran Expeditionary Navy's arsenal. The Valos were rock people, silicon-based life forms that looked like ambulatory boulders, and their ships reflected this. Massive, heavily armored, slow but nearly indestructible. They had been building warships for 50,000 years, and they knew what worked. Admiral Marcus Stone arrived at New Gdansk 12 hours after the Valos fleet, with every ship he could pull from nearby sectors. 31 vessels against 53. The math was not good, but Stone had not come to New Gdansk to surrender, and he had not spent the last decade building a fleet just to run when challenged. He opened a communication channel to the Valos fleet commander, whose name translated roughly as Stone Who Endures. It was a supremely Valos name, emphasizing permanence and immovability. Stone thought there was a certain irony in his own name being similar. Commander Stone Who Endures. This is Admiral Marcus Stone of the Terran Expeditionary Navy. New Gdansk is a settled world of the Free Stars Coalition. We do not recognize your claim to this territory. We do not recognize. Withdraw your fleet immediately. The Valos commander's response was slow, each word separated by a pause that suggested the translation device was struggling with concepts that did not exist in Valos language. Admiral Stone, you speak of claims you do not understand. This world was surveyed by Valos explorers 50,000 of your years ago. Our marker beacons still orbit this star. Our territorial rights are established in the oldest records of the Galactic Council. You have settled a Valos world without permission. You are trespassers. Your marker beacons are dark and have been for thousands of years, Stone replied. Your people abandoned this region long ago. By any reasonable standard, unclaimed territory becomes available for settlement. New Gdansk has 200,000 human colonists who have turned this world into a home. We will not abandon them because of a 50,000-year-old claim you never bothered to enforce. That is not your decision to make, human. The Council has ruled on this matter. New Gdansk falls within ancient Valos territory, and the Council has authorized us to reclaim it. Your colonists have. The pause was longer this time. 6 of your hours to begin evacuation. After that, we will enforce compliance. Stone cut the transmission and turned to his command staff. Recommendations? Captain Li Wei, promoted to Stone's tactical officer after the successful first contact with the Kryn, studied the holographic display showing both fleets. They have us outnumbered and outgunned. Every one of their ships outmasses our largest vessel by a factor of 3. So we do not fight straight, Stone said. What are their weaknesses? Li Wei highlighted sections of the Valos formation on the display. They are slow. Those ships are built like flying fortresses, incredible defenses, but poor maneuverability. Our vessels are faster, more agile. We can outturn them, out-accelerate them. Their weapons are designed for long-range slugging matches. If we close to point-blank range, their big guns become a liability. Boarding actions? Asked Commander Sarah Chen, who had transferred from colony ship duty to military command 3 years earlier. Li Wei nodded slowly. Possible. The Valos are large, strong, and tough, but they are not fast. In close combat, a human with powered armor and modern weapons might actually have an advantage. It would be brutal, though. Boarding a Valos warship would be like fighting inside a flying bunker. Stone made his decision. We go in close. We use our speed and size advantage. We target their sensor arrays and communication systems, blind them, isolate them, force them to fight as individuals instead of as a coordinated fleet. And we make it clear from the start that we are not backing down. If they want New Gdansk, they will have to take it over our debris field. The Battle of New Gdansk began 6 hours later, when the Valos fleet moved into orbit over the planet and began deploying landing craft. Stone's fleet accelerated at maximum burn, closing the distance far faster than Valos tactical doctrine considered reasonable. The Valos opened fire at maximum range, and their guns were devastating. The 10 Relentless took 3 direct hits and lost power, drifting out of formation. The 10 Courage exploded when a Valos particle beam penetrated her reactor shielding, but the Terran ships kept coming. They wove through the Valos formation like sharks through a pod of whales, too fast for the massive Valos ships to track effectively. Human missiles, far more maneuverable than Valos weapons, struck at sensor arrays and communication nodes. The Valos fleet began losing coordination, each ship forced to fight independently. The 10 Indomitable came alongside a Valos dreadnought and fired at point-blank range. The human weapons barely scratched the Valos armor. But that was not the point. The Indomitable launched boarding pods, armored shells containing 20 Marines each. The pods latched onto the Valos hull and cut through with plasma torches. Marines in powered armor poured into the Valos ship's corridors. The fighting inside was savage. The Valos were individually stronger than humans, and their rocky bodies could shrug off small arms fire that would kill a human instantly. But the human Marines were faster, more flexible, and far more experienced in close-quarters combat. The Valos had not fought a boarding action in living memory. The humans had spent the last decade training for exactly this scenario. The Valos crew fought bravely, but they were not prepared for the sheer aggressiveness of the human assault. Marines used shaped charges to blow through bulkheads, bypassing Valos' defensive positions. They used the ship's own systems against it, venting atmosphere in sections where Valos forces had concentrated. They fought with a desperation born of knowing that if they lost, their people on New Gdansk would be forced from their homes. After 3 hours of combat, the Valos dreadnought surrendered. The 10 Pathfinder captured a second Valos warship through similar tactics. A third Valos ship was crippled when a lucky missile strike destroyed its main power distribution system. And suddenly the mathematics of the battle changed. The Valos still had numerical superiority, but they had lost their aura of invincibility. The humans had proven they could fight, could win, could take on ships 3 times their size, and come out victorious. Commander Stone, who endures, sent a message to Admiral Stone. The Valos commander's tone had changed from condescending certainty to something closer to respect mixed with shock. Admiral Stone, this is not how civilized species conduct warfare. Your tactics are brutal. Your willingness to risk your ships is reckless. Your boarding actions violate a dozen protocols established by the Council. And yet they work, Stone replied. Commander, here is the situation. You came here to take our colony. We came here to defend it. You have lost 3 ships and taken casualties you were not expecting. We have lost 2 ships and many good people. This battle can continue until both our fleets are destroyed, or we can stop now. Your choice. There was a long pause. Then, Stone, who endures, spoke again, and there was something in the translated words that sounded almost like admiration. You would have kept fighting. Even if we had destroyed half your fleet, you would have kept fighting. Our species refuses to be conquered, Stone corrected. There is a difference. Will you withdraw, or do we continue? The Valos fleet withdrew. It was not a rout. They left in formation, in good order, with their captured ships retrieved through a negotiated exchange of prisoners. But they left. New Gdansk remained in human hands. And word of the battle spread across the galaxy, faster than any ship could travel. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. The topic was simple. Humanity had defeated a council member species in open combat. The Valos hegemony, one of the most ancient and respected civilizations in the galaxy, had been forced to retreat by a species that had been exiled barely 3 decades ago. The implications were staggering. 3 council species sent diplomatic messages to the Free Stars Coalition. 2 were former client civilizations that requested information about the process of joining the coalition. 1 was an independent species that had maintained neutrality for millennia, but now saw humanity as a potential ally against council expansion into their territory. Elena Voss welcomed all 3 sets of diplomats and began negotiations. The Free Stars Coalition grew. Within a year of the Battle of New Gdansk, 7 new species had joined. 2 were former council clients who had watched the battle reports and decided they would rather ally with humanity than continue serving council members. 3 were independent species from the outer regions who saw the coalition as a counterweight to council power. 2 were species that had been in the process of being conquered by council members but had managed to hold out long enough for human intervention to arrive. The Terran Expeditionary Navy grew as well. New shipyards came online in a dozen systems. The latest designs incorporated lessons from New Gdansk faster engines, more maneuverable frames, weapons optimized for close-range combat, and humanity began building a new class of vessel, the Titangent-class dreadnought. These ships were massive, each one massing as much as a Valos warship, but built with human design philosophy. Speed over armor. Firepower over endurance. The ability to strike hard and fast, then disengage before the enemy could respond. Admiral Stone oversaw the construction of the first Tangent-class ship and named it the 10 Defiance, after the experimental vessel that had first proven human FTL capability. When Defiance launched from the Titan shipyards above Saturn, she carried enough firepower to match 3 Valos dreadnoughts. And she was just the first. 10 more were under construction, with 20 more planned. The Galactic Council sent another delegation to meet with Elena Voss. This time, they came not with threats, but with demands for negotiation. The Council wanted to establish containment protocols, agreements that would limit Freestar's expansion, restrict the coalition from interfering with Council member affairs, and prevent the liberation of any more client species. In exchange, the Council would officially recognize the Freestar's coalition's right to exist, and would establish trade agreements. Elena read the proposal and recognized it for what it was: an attempt to cage humanity again, this time with diplomacy, instead of exile. She composed her response carefully, knowing it would be read by every council member and distributed throughout their civilization. To the Galactic Council, we acknowledge your proposal. We reject your terms. You had your chance to deal with us as equals 30 years ago. You chose exile instead. You told us we were too dangerous, too individualistic, too aggressive to fit into your civilized order. You were probably right. But the consequence of that decision is that we are no longer interested in fitting into your order. We have built our own, she continued, her words measured but firm. You speak of containment protocols, as if you have the authority to limit our growth, to dictate our foreign policy, to control who we ally with. You do not have that authority. You gave it up when you exiled us. The Freestar's coalition will continue to expand into unclaimed territory. We will continue to offer freedom to species who request it. We will continue to defend our worlds and our allies against anyone who threatens them, whether they are council members or not. The final paragraph became famous across human space. You had your chance to have humanity as a junior partner, grateful for your guidance and willing to accept your rules. That time has passed. Now you have a choice. You can accept that the Freestar's coalition exists, that we are your equals, and that we will not be controlled. Or, you can try to force us back into submission. But be warned, the Battle of New Gdansk was not a fluke. It was a demonstration. We are willing to fight for our freedom. We are good at fighting. And we are not going away. The choice is yours. But choose carefully. Because if you choose war, we will give you one. And it will not be the easy victory you expect. The message was sent. The Council's response was months in coming. And when it arrived, it was not what Elena had expected. The Council did not choose war. But they did not choose peace, either. Instead, they chose something in between. Cold War. A state of tension and competition short of open conflict. Trade restrictions. Diplomatic pressure on neutral species to avoid the Freestar's coalition. Military buildups along the borders. And a gathering sense that something was going to break, sooner or later. Admiral Stone prepared for what he knew was coming. The Council had been humiliated at New Gdansk. They had been defied in Elena's message. They could not let that stand without response, or they would lose credibility with their own client species. The question was not if the Council would strike back, but when and where, and how humanity would respond when they did. On New Gdansk, Governor Katya Volkov stood on the balcony of her office and looked out at the city spreading below. It had grown in the year since the battle. More buildings, more farms in the surrounding countryside. More people arriving from Earth and Mars and the other colonies, drawn by the story of the world that had stood against the Council and won. She thought about the future, about the children being born who would never know anything but freedom, who would grow up believing they had a right to exist among the stars, regardless of what ancient civilizations thought. She thought about the cost of that freedom. The ships destroyed, the people killed, the certainty that more battles were coming, more sacrifices would be required. And she decided it was worth it, every bit of it. Because the alternative was to bow, to accept limits imposed by others, to live as clients or exiles in a galaxy that belonged to someone else. And that was not acceptable. Not anymore. Not ever again. The hammer fell 5 years after the Battle of New Gdansk. The Galactic Council, unable to tolerate the continued growth of the Free Stars Coalition, authorized Operation Correction. It was the largest military mobilization in Council history. 5,000 warships drawn from 8 member species, all converging on a single target. The target was not New Gdansk, which the Council had learned to avoid. Instead, they chose Tartarus Gate, a strategic system at the edge of Freestar's territory where humanity had built a massive Stargate hub connecting dozens of colony worlds. The plan was simple and overwhelming. Destroy Tartarus Gate, and the Freestar's coalition would be fractured. Travel times between human worlds would increase from days to weeks. Coordination would become nearly impossible. The coalition would collapse into isolated pockets that could be negotiated with or conquered individually. It was a good plan, based on solid strategic thinking. It might even have worked if the Council had been facing a conventional enemy. Admiral Marcus Stone received word of the Council fleet's approach when they were still 3 days out from Tartarus Gate. His scouts had been watching Council military movements for years, and the sudden concentration of ships was impossible to miss. He had 800 vessels available, counting every combat-capable ship in the Freestars coalition. The math was brutal. 5,000 against 800. 6-to-1 odds against the most powerful fleet humanity had ever assembled. He could have evacuated Tartarus Gate, pulled back, saved his ships for a defensive campaign that might slow the Council advance. It would have been the sensible, strategic choice. Admiral Stone had not become the commander of the Terran Expeditionary Navy by making sensible choices. He sent a message to every ship in the Coalition fleet. They think numbers will win this battle. They think their superior technology and experience will overwhelm us. They think we will run when we see the size of their fleet. They have forgotten something important about humanity. We do not calculate odds before we decide to fight. We decide to fight, and then we figure out how to win. Tartarus Gate does not fall. Not today. Not ever. All ships, prepare for combat. The Freestars fleet assembled at Tartarus Gate in a formation that would have made traditional fleet tacticians weep. Instead of the orderly lines and defensive positions that Council species favored, the human ships were arranged in clusters, small, independent groups that could move and fight autonomously. Each cluster included a mix of ship types: heavy hitters, fast attackers, electronic warfare vessels, and support craft. They looked chaotic. That was intentional. The Council fleet emerged from FTL 3 astronomical units from Tartarus Gate and immediately formed their traditional battle formation. A massive wall of ships, layered by species. The Valos in front, their heavy armor designed to absorb the first wave of enemy fire. Behind them, the Yulari with their precision weapons. Then, the Korath with their swarming tactics. Behind them, 5 more species, each with their own doctrine, their own strengths, all coordinated through the rigid command structure that had served the Council for millions of years. Admiral Stone looked at the display and smiled. It was a terrifying smile. The smile of someone who had spent 5 years planning for exactly this moment. All clusters, execute Dragon Swarm. The Freestars fleet exploded into motion. The clusters broke apart, each one accelerating on a different vector, moving at speeds the Council fleet could not match. They did not attack the Council formation head-on. Instead, they came at it from a dozen different angles, forcing the Council ships to turn, to reorient, to break their careful formation, to address threats from multiple directions. The first cluster to engage was led by Captain Li Wei in the 10 Pathfinder. His group consisted of 20 fast attack ships armed with long-range missiles. They fired from maximum range and immediately turned away, not waiting to see the results. The missiles were not designed to destroy the heavy Valos ships in front. They were designed to confuse sensors, jam communications, and force the Valos to activate their point defense systems. While the Valos were distracted, the second cluster attacked from a different angle. This group, led by Commander Sarah Chen in the 10 New Beijing, consisted of heavier ships armed with particle beams and kinetic weapons. They targeted the gaps in the Council formation, the spaces where different species forces met and where coordination was weakest. They fired, killed 3 ships, and disengaged before the Council could respond. The third cluster never engaged at all, led by a Vex commander named Click Raz Click, whose name humans could not properly pronounce. This group was composed entirely of electronic warfare vessels. They broadcast false sensor readings, spoofed communication signals, and generally created chaos in the Council fleet's information networks. Ships began reporting enemy contacts that did not exist. Orders from the Council command ship were intercepted and modified. The rigid, hierarchical command structure that the Council relied on began to fray. The Battle of Tartarus Gate lasted 18 hours. It was not a single continuous fight, but a series of sharp, brutal engagements, as Free Star's clusters struck, disengaged, regrouped, and struck again. The Council fleet had more ships, more firepower, more of everything. But they fought, as they had always fought. Coordinated, careful, following doctrine, established over millions of years. The Free Star's fleet fought like a swarm of angry hornets, striking from unexpected angles, ignoring conventional tactics, willing to take losses if it meant creating opportunities. By hour 6, the Council had lost 400 ships. The Free Stars had lost 200. The math was still in the Council's favor, but the morale balance had shifted. Council crews were not used to this kind of combat. They were used to battles where both sides maintained formation, exchanged fire at a distance, and accepted victory or defeat based on who had the stronger fleet. This was different. This was chaos. This was fighting an enemy that refused to play by the rules. By hour 12, the Council fleet commander, a Yulari named Cethys, the same diplomat who had met with Admiral Stone years earlier, sent a message to his superiors. The humans are not fighting to win. They are fighting to inflict maximum casualties regardless of cost. Their tactics are suicidal. They are willing to sacrifice ships to create openings. They are willing to ram our vessels if it means destroying them. This is not warfare. This is madness. The Council High Command sent back orders. Continue the assault. Tartarus Gate must fall. The Free Stars coalition must be broken. Accept the casualties. Victory will be achieved through superior numbers. Cethys followed his orders because that was what Council officers did. But he knew, deep in whatever served a Yulari as a soul, that something had changed. The Council was not fighting a conventional enemy. They were fighting something new. Something that did not care about the old rules. By hour 15, the Terran Expeditionary Navy deployed its secret weapon. 3 Titangent-class dreadnoughts, led by Admiral Stone in the 10 Defiance, had been holding back, waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came when the Council fleet was fully engaged, scattered across a volume of space trying to deal with a dozen different threats. The 3 Titans jumped into the heart of the Council formation and opened fire. Each Titan carried enough firepower to destroy a dozen conventional warships. They were not designed to survive extended combat. They were designed to cause maximum destruction in the shortest possible time. The 10 Defiance targeted the Council command ship, the Yulari vessel where Cethys coordinated the entire fleet. A single barrage of particle beams and missiles overwhelmed the Yulari ship's defenses. It died in silence, taking Cethys and 2,000 crew members with it. Without their command ship, the Council fleet began to fragment. Different species forces had different ideas about what to do next. Some wanted to retreat and regroup. Some wanted to push forward and take Tartarus Gate despite the losses. Some wanted to stop and establish a defensive position. For critical minutes, the Council fleet lost all coordination, and in those minutes, the Free Stars fleet struck with everything they had left. By hour 18, the Council fleet was retreating. They had lost 1,700 ships. Another 300 were crippled and drifting. They had not taken Tartarus Gate. They had not broken the Free Stars coalition. They had proven only that humanity and their allies could fight, could win, could inflict losses that the Council was not prepared to accept. The remaining Council ships jumped to FTL and fled, leaving their crippled vessels behind. The Free Stars fleet had lost 420 ships, nearly half their fleet. But Tartarus Gate still stood. The Stargate network still functioned, and humanity had proven something that changed the galaxy forever. The Council could be defeated. Within weeks, 3 more Council member species withdrew from the conflict. They issued formal statements declaring that the Free Stars Coalition posed no threat to their territory, and they saw no reason to continue military operations. 2 other species requested formal peace negotiations. The monolithic unity of the Council was cracking. The moderate faction within the Council, those who had always questioned the wisdom of exiling humanity, seized the moment. They called for emergency reforms. They argued that the old ways were no longer working, that the galaxy was changing, that the Council needed to change with it, or risk irrelevance. They pointed to the 12 client species that had requested information about joining the Free Stars Coalition in the months since Tartarus Gate. They pointed to the growing dissatisfaction among younger Council species who had never agreed with the rigid hierarchy. They pointed to the simple fact that the Council had just lost a quarter of the largest fleet ever assembled to a species they had exiled barely 35 years ago. The conservative faction fought back. They argued that this was exactly why humanity was dangerous, why they needed to be contained or destroyed. They called for total war, the mobilization of every Council member species, the deployment of weapons that had not been used in millions of years. They would not accept defeat. They would not accept change. They would hold on to power even if it meant destroying the galaxy they claimed to protect. The conflict within the Council became violent. Not militarily. The Council species did not fight each other directly, but politically, socially, economically. Trade agreements broke down. Defense pacts were questioned. Species that had cooperated for millennia began to eye each other with suspicion. The Council was tearing itself apart, and everyone knew it. Elena Voss watched the Council fracture from New Terra and knew the opportunity had arrived. For 35 years, humanity had been reacting to the Council's decisions, building in response to their exile, fighting in response to their attacks. Now it was time to act instead of react. She authorized what came to be known as the Reckoning, a coordinated series of operations across a dozen systems where client species of Council members were being held in servitude. The Terran Expeditionary Navy, what remained of it after Tartarus Gate, split into a dozen task forces. Each force was assigned to a client species that had sent secret messages to the Free Stars Coalition requesting liberation. The operations were surgical. Human ships would jump into a system, broadcast a message offering freedom and alliance, and wait for the client species to respond. If they accepted, the humans would help them evacuate anyone who wanted to leave. If the Council member species tried to interfere, the humans would fight long enough for the evacuation to complete, then disengage. It was not conquest, it was liberation. Or at least, that was how Elena presented it to the galaxy. The client species were being given a choice: continue serving their Council masters, or join the Free Stars Coalition as equals. Millions chose freedom. They left their worlds on human ships, on coalition vessels, on anything that could carry them to Free Stars territory. They brought their skills, their knowledge, their culture, and they brought stories about life under Council rule, stories that made even moderate Council species uncomfortable. The Council could not stop it. They were too divided, too focused on their internal conflicts. By the time they realized what was happening, a dozen client species had been liberated, transported to Free Stars territory, and given worlds of their own to settle. The Free Stars Coalition had grown from 7 species to 19, almost overnight. The final act came 2 years after Tartarus Gate. Elena Voss sent a message not to the Galactic Council, but to every species in the galaxy, Council members and independents alike. She proposed a new organization, the Galactic Commonwealth. It would replace the Council with a democratic body where every species had equal representation. There would be no client species, no servitude, no hierarchies based on age or technological advancement. Every civilization would govern itself as it saw fit, but they would cooperate on matters of mutual concern: trade, defense, scientific research, and peaceful expansion. The proposal was radical. It threatened to overturn millions of years of galactic order. The conservative council members rejected it immediately. But the moderate faction saw it differently. They saw an opportunity to transform the council into something better, something that could actually survive in a galaxy where species like humanity existed. They began negotiations with Elena and the Free Stars Coalition. The negotiations took 3 years. They were difficult, contentious, and several times came close to breakdown. But slowly, painfully, a new order began to take shape. The old Galactic Council was dissolved. The Galactic Commonwealth was established with humanity as a founding member, equal to species that had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. Client species were freed, their servitude agreements voided. Every species was guaranteed sovereignty and the right to self-determination. Not every council species joined the Commonwealth. 3 refused and withdrew into their own territory, maintaining their old hierarchies and client relationships. The galaxy watched to see if they would survive or if history would eventually force them to adapt. But the majority of council species, and nearly all independent species, chose to join. The Commonwealth was imperfect, messy, and constantly arguing. But it was free. Elena Voss stood before the first session of the Commonwealth Assembly. She was 70 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with decades of stress and responsibility. She had been ambassador during the exile, secretary general during the long, dark, first president during the war. Now she was simply one representative among hundreds, speaking for humanity and the Terran Federation. She thought about the journey humanity had taken. From exile to survival, to expansion, to war, to this moment. Standing as equals in a galaxy that had once rejected them, she thought about the cost the ships lost, the people killed, the years of struggle and sacrifice. She thought about what they had built, and what they had become. Representatives of the Commonwealth, she began, her voice still strong despite her age. 37 years ago, the old council exiled my species. They told us we were too dangerous, too aggressive, too individualistic, to fit into civilized society. They thought they were protecting the galaxy from us. Instead, they did something else. They freed us from the burden of seeking approval from those who would never give it. They forced us to find our own path. They made us prove that we could survive and thrive without anyone's permission. She paused, looking around the chamber at the hundreds of species represented there. I will not pretend humanity is perfect. We are competitive. We are aggressive. We value individual freedom over collective harmony. These traits make us difficult neighbors sometimes, but they also make us resilient. They make us creative. They make us willing to take risks that others might avoid. And when we found other species suffering under the old order, we offered them the same thing we had been forced to claim for ourselves: freedom. End quote. One we filled. End quote. Elena's voice softened. The council thought exile was a punishment. They thought isolation would teach us our place. Instead, it became our forge. The pressure, the struggle, the absolute necessity of succeeding or dying, it transformed us. It made us stronger. It made us determined. It made us into the species standing before you today. And I think, looking back, that exile was the greatest gift the council could have given us, because it forced us to become truly free. She concluded with words that would be remembered for generations. This Commonwealth is imperfect. It will face challenges. There will be disagreements, conflicts, perhaps even wars, but it is better than what came before. Because it is based on equality rather than hierarchy, on freedom rather than servitude, on the belief that every species has the right to determine their own destiny. The old council tried to cage humanity. We broke free. And then we broke the cage so that others could be free too. That is our legacy. That is what we offer the galaxy. Not domination, not conquest, but the simple, radical idea that no species should bow to another unless they choose to. The assembly applauded. Not all of them. Some species still resented humanity's rise, still mourned the old order. But enough. Enough to move forward. Enough to build something new. Admiral Marcus Stone, now retired and serving as an advisor to the Commonwealth Defense Force, watched Elena's speech from the gallery. He thought about the first time he had met her, decades ago, when she had returned from the council chambers with news of humanity's exile. He remembered her defiance then, her absolute refusal to accept defeat. That defiance had become humanity's defining characteristic. It had carried them through the long dark, through the claiming, through the wars, and finally to this moment. He wondered what would come next. The galaxy was vast. There were still unexplored regions, unknown species, challenges that would test everything the Commonwealth had built. But for the first time since humanity had reached for the stars, they would face those challenges not alone. Not as exiles, but as equals among equals. As partners in the great work of civilization. On New Gdansk, Governor Katya Volkov, now retired and running a small farm with her grandchildren, watched the Commonwealth's founding ceremony on her screen. She thought about the battle that had happened in orbit above her world, the day humanity had proven they could stand against the Council. That had been the turning point, she believed, the moment when the galaxy had stopped seeing humanity as upstart children and started seeing them as something else. Something dangerous. Yes, but also something necessary. The galaxy needed species like humanity. Species that refused to accept the status quo. Species that questioned authority. Species that valued freedom over comfort. Because without those species, civilizations stagnated. They became rigid, inflexible, unable to adapt to change. They became like the old council, ancient, powerful, and increasingly irrelevant in a galaxy that no longer fit their assumptions. Katya's granddaughter, a girl of 8 named Elena after the woman who had saved their world, asked a simple question. "Grandmother, are we safe now? Will there be more wars?" Katya considered lying, giving the child the comfort of false certainty. But that was not the human way. That was not what the last 37 years had taught them. "I do not know," she said honestly. "There might be more wars. There will certainly be more challenges. But we are not alone anymore. We have allies. We have proven ourselves. And we have something that no one can take away from us." "What is that?" Elena asked. "The knowledge that we can survive anything. That we can turn exile into opportunity. That we can take what others see as worthless and make it valuable. That we can break cages, build new worlds, and change the galaxy when it needs changing. That is what humanity is, child. That is what we proved. And that is something worth remembering, no matter what comes next." The girl nodded, understanding in the way children sometimes do. And Katya turned back to her farm, to the crops growing in soil that had been barren rock 40 years ago, to the life she had built on a world the Council had tried to take away. She was home, her people were free. And the galaxy, whether it liked it or not, had learned to make room for humanity among the stars. The exile was over. The long dark was past. The wars had been fought, and, if not won, at least survived. What came next was uncertain. But uncertainty had never stopped humanity before. They had been rejected by the galaxy's oldest civilizations and had built their own civilization in response. They had been caged and had broken free. They had been told their place and had refused to accept it. They thought exile was a punishment. Humanity made it their forge. And from that forge had come something new, something the galaxy had not seen in millions of years. Change. Real, fundamental change. The old order was dead. The new order was being born. And humanity, the species that had been cast out barely 4 decades ago, stood at the center of it all. Not because they were the strongest, not because they were the oldest or the most advanced, but because they refused to accept that the galaxy belonged to anyone but those willing to fight for their place in it. That refusal, That defiance, that absolute unwillingness to bow that was humanity's gift to the galaxy. It was a dangerous gift. But dangerous gifts were sometimes exactly what stagnant civilizations needed to remember how to grow.